Heidi Culbertson. I am the CEO of Marvee, a voice strategy and design studio which brings voice experiences and older adults together. I am also an Alexa champion. I'm also the co-founder of Promptful.io, where we help people learn voice design through interactive workshops. Today, I'll be speaking on some best practices for creating voice experiences that meet users where they are. I'll be highlighting, evangelizing, and hopefully prompting a call to action for voice and the over 50 cohort. But first, we've probably all seen the New York Times front page from a few weeks ago, Memorial Weekend. And what struck me was not just the numbers and the incalculable loss, and it honored the names, we all do. But what struck me, and what the New York Times did incredibly well, was the notes on lives lived, the listing of perhaps legacy moments, the peek into their life story. COVID-19 has brought forward large and small acts of kindness, from grocery pickups to window waves for social interaction. And it's also exposed a bias that has long pre-existed this pandemic. By grouping all people 65 and older into one category, we are inadvertently designing a world where our later years are valued less. So I believe this time is incredibly important, this period of time, that all of us, leaders, developers, designers, innovators, students, teachers, we're all important for designing a future where everyone counts. I just think it's time for a better narrative. And how cool if it was powered by voice and driven by the voice community. Because voice is the right technology at the right time to meet the upcoming massive demographic shift as we live longer, healthier, and more active lives. So today I'm going to share some best practices and our approach to creating some successful voice experiences. I'll share how understanding a specific audience, who may be a target audience, or perhaps just part of a broad audience, that a brand might want to better engage with, communicate with. How understanding who they are before you build impacts your business, impacts content choices, impacts how it aligns with other channels you have, impacts personalization and design, and impacts user satisfaction and retention. Now, as I thought about speaking today, so much about creating voice experience starts with one's perspective. Our experiences, our biases, they play into our take on language and communication, and even the ideas we come up with. It's why having a diverse team involved in creating voice experiences is so important, whether that be an in-house team, an external team, or testing properly. The segments of the population that were very early adopters of voice technology, way back in the beginning, have been kids and older adults. What an opportunity. It's tech for good, but it's also just smart business, as the data shows the older demographic is expected to double by 2030. And the over 50 cohort holds over 70% of the wealth and the discretionary monies that contribute annually to our economy. There's money to be spent. There's money to be captured. And it's not just being spent on healthcare. When we build for voice, we create interactions that combine knowledge of who the users are, high quality content suited to them, with a goal to deliver it in ways that satisfy both the user and business. Not an easy task, but it does start with understanding users. So who are older adults? The over 50 cohort is not one monolithic group. It is comprised of 4 generations, all influenced by the generations and the cultural influences that came before them, Understanding their context will help you find the right use cases, the right user stories, begin to identify vocabulary, the design of content management, and needed user flow variations. So today, the oldest old is primarily the GI, or what's known as the greatest generation. They lived through World War II, the Spanish flu, the Great Depression, polio, when they were just starting to have kids. This is a generation that listened to the radio, big band music, radio programs. They regularly wrote very descriptive handwritten letters. And they taught their children to write handwritten thank you notes for everything. Then there's the silent generation, family-focused, value-driven, and thrifty. Of course, having had parents who struggled in the times before them. They experienced the space program, Woodstock, and JFK's assassination is often called the defining moment for their generation. Next up is Boomer generation. Wide range of experiences and behaviors, whether one was born at the beginning or the end. Bruce Springsteen to the Brady Bunch. Boomers were radicals of the 70s and yuppies of the 80s. And then there's Generation X, which the oldest of Generation X is now over age 50. They're often known as latchkey kids, as single parents became more prevalent, or both parents began to work outside the home. But just like today, each generation had their music, their favorite celebrities, their world moments, and understanding this user context helps define the right ideas in today's voice world. Now, the realities of aging are we all age from birth. And yes, as we get older, we will experience hearing loss, diminishing vision, or maybe along the way we'll lose a step or two. So physical changes do occur, as does social. And social isolation is a major concern with getting older. There's much opportunity for voice-only and voice-forward experiences to assist here. And in many places where previous technologies were just not sufficient, voice is such a good complement for real-world interaction. Now, there is this huge myth that I've spoken about before, that everyone over age 50 has white hair, uses a walker, and is in dire need of health care. This is a myth. In reality, today, it is much more common to see active, healthy 90-year-olds. There's even a Centennial Olympics. Great article written in the BBC News recently about that. But all older adults have the same priorities: physical health, mental, cognitive health, and staying socially engaged. Now, as I like action words, if voice can keep people moving, keep them thinking, and keep them connected, we will see satisfaction in quality of life and health. And we'll also see an uptick in the business around us. It's always a good idea to discover where potential users already hang out. Where do they play? What do they like to do? Research shows us a few areas where many spend most of their time. They like to travel and explore. They like to learn new things, although I don't know if Zoom was originally on their list. And they want to focus on things and people that give them a sense of purpose. Now, knowing all this information, and if we choose to change perspective a little bit, to view older adults, accessibility, everyone, through a slightly different lens than a chronological number, perhaps via what stage of life they might be in, we will better meet everyone where they want to be met and where voice makes the most sense. So let's look at a framework to putting the user in the center, looking at possible audience mix, and thinking about design nuances. If we have a use case and at a high level identify from the perspective of stage of life, everyone falls across a spectrum of athletic to active to independent to assisted to care dependent. Most older adults fall in the athletic to independent. Next, we might look at what conditions they might have. Are they healthy? Do they have vision loss, hearing loss, or mobility challenges? How is that going to affect design, development, or voice app discovery? Do they have any chronic conditions? Diabetes, heart disease, bone strength? What is their physical environment, their family environment? Do they have an engaged family and support system? Or are they possibly elder orphans? And then we also look at, is the use case situational, where they're carrying something, so their hands are busy? Or are they driving and thus their eyes are distracted, hopefully looking at the road? Is their limitation temporary? Perhaps an injury, or they're having a knee replacement? Or perhaps it's a permanent limitation. Now, much of this you may not know about your users, but planning for data capture. As users use your voice skill or action, it will reveal design needs. It often leads to expanding user flows, new content management models, and to eventually and hopefully be inclusive to meet everyone, to meet all. Now, when we think of technology in older adults, a lot of people will say they're not tech savvy enough, and some are not. Most are. Often when thinking of voice in older adults, everyone immediately thinks healthcare, and that's definitely a fit. But there's so much more. Top line ideas might be communication, fitness, healthy eating, family messaging. Now, stay at home has certainly exposed how we can do better meeting needs across the board. You know, many of the frustrations that we felt over the last 2 months or so, many of the fast innovations happening during this time for delivery and such, when the majority of us has been working remotely, educating children, homeschooling, trying to take care of elder parents and helping out a neighbor, isolating at home. So many of these services have been a want and a need by many before the pandemic. I think that's a positive that's going to come out of the past couple months and what we're going through as a world. We're seeing that innovation can happen quite quickly. Okay, moving on. We're going to talk about use cases. When evaluating any user journey, and it might be approached as a job to be done, a primary task to complete, a person to connect with, remember to look for that micro moment where it tells you that a voice conversation makes an experience easier, faster, and with less cognitive load. That's really a golden ticket. It's the first thing we look for. So let's look at a few user stories. These are actual quotes from older adults we've interacted with that I've put their quote in user story format. As a 90-year-old with macular degeneration, I want to hear about local activities so I don't miss the fun. As a 74-year-old woman who loves adventure, I want to continue to be strong enough to lift my own darn carry-on bag up into the overhead bin so that I'll still be traveling at age 90. As a 77-year-old, I want to play games to stay mentally sharp so I can keep my buddies out of trouble. What's amazing here in these real user stories, they're not about problems. They're about aspirations. They're about being able to keep on doing. Voice is not just about building interactions to fix a problem. We need to be creating experience to fulfill aspirations, because goal setting, dreaming, connecting doesn't stop at 50 or 65 or 85 or even 100. Now, conversation design often begins early on with sample scripts. Understanding the user, matching high quality content is key. Speaking to them in the correct word choice, using the correct vocabulary for who they are is important. So writing sample scripts should happen early, and dialogue needs to be written for their ears, not our own. It begins with writing and then rewriting and then rewriting a lot of sample dialogues. There are so many nuances to writing conversation. So we'll cover a couple best practices for when writing scripts and also thinking about user flows and the interaction model. Variation in system response versus consistency. You may write several alternate responses so that the user does not become bored as they return to the voice experience. Or you may need to say the exact same thing. The decision comes from what the use case is. And it should always tie back to what the user goal is and their context. When considering implicit versus explicit confirmation, it's really about, is the user feeling heard? But when in doubt, use explicit with older adults, especially for early users. Be brief, be concise. It's really about letting them know that they were heard. Expect to handle bargains and really take a look at the data to decipher why the bargain is happening. Is it because of scripting or the system or not allowing enough time for a user to respond? Or is it just the user? Data will identify different patterns. So with all of these, just a reminder to make sure you're capturing data and you're ready to make data-driven decisions. And do be aware, because many use template phrasing, that sometimes that phrasing is misinterpreted, especially for those who might have some hearing loss. Play everything out loud in testing, every word, every phrase, every sentence, every turn. And that brings us to testing. I think we need more out-of-the-box thinking with testing. There's some great tools out there for automated testing. But if you're unable to test live with real people, with real older adults, there's ways to simulate some things. You can simulate how, for example, a low vision individual might interact with your multimodal voice experience. How do you do that? Role play with sunglasses on. And even put a black dot in the middle of the glasses to simulate the vision loss with macular degeneration. You can use earplugs to muffle sound. There are methodologies to follow when we test, and they're very important so that your data is valid. But don't shy away from letting your creativity out so you can find edge cases. And you can minimize the possibility of excluding, accidentally, a portion of audience. No matter what your role or what function you perform within the voice experience world as a creator, whether it be a developer, designer, content writer, it's so important to understand the why, to understand the importance of A/B testing. Because everyone speaks so differently. A/B testing right from the first script through post-publication of a voice app is one of the most beneficial things that we can do. And then rely on that data that you're capturing to drive decisions. For multimodal, my recommendation is follow the accessibility guidelines for visuals. For older adults, be sure large images, high contrast text, and be overly obvious. Provide sound cues or visual markers so that the user knows when it's their turn to speak and when you're listening to them. Now, there is one huge challenge for voice assistants, and specifically the elderly, the oldest old. Device setup and onboarding of the device. As a creator, whether it's as a developer, designer, voice company, brand, be aware a family member typically assists with the device setup and onboarding to the device. Now, my hope is we will soon see something like mobile device management software, so a family member can push a pre-configured profile to a voice assistant with all the settings already set up for their loved one. But in the meantime, as creators, the device user is not the only user that we meet when we create third-party voice experiences. So we're often interacting with the family. So that's really just a note to market to all parties who might be involved for the discovery of your fantastic voice app. So to wrap up and summarize, we want to understand our users, determine a real problem, need, or want, set expectations before the build, know what you want success to look like so that you can see measurable outcomes. And you also capture subjective outcomes. Focus on high quality content and high quality delivery of that content. And then let data drive your decisions. So I want to thank everybody for listening. Go create something great. And please, please, please leave no older adult behind. Thank you.